Hello again. It's great to be with you for our little Friday get togethers. Last week we used the example of Mother Teresa, Saint Teresa of Calcutta, to help us develop a habit of interior and then also exterior silence. And I hope this past week brought you the opportunity of trying to practice some of those things a bit and to try to tune in and listen more deeply and more succinctly to what's happening within and where God might be calling you. Now, it's interesting when you start talking about interior and exterior silence and listening to God. It then begs the next question: what are we listening for? Are we expecting to actually hear a human voice coming from the presence of God during those periods of silence that we're trying to create? See, a lot of folks sometimes get very frustrated in prayer because they're not sure where prayer is supposed to lead them. And as I mentioned last week, we often just resort to the formal prayers that we say. And when we step back from that after doing that time and time again, we say to ourselves, well, where is all this really leading us? What's the experience that I'm supposed to be gaining from these times of prayer? What is it I'm listening for? Where am I supposed to go with this? Well, to listen for God means to listen more deeply to some deeper things that are happening in the life of every human being and, in fact, in all of creation. It is to begin to listen to a type of presence. But it's a type of presence that is going to lead us in a particular place. So, for example, those who are married understand that in the presence of their spouse, it's not only just the words that are being spoken and the gestures that are being experienced, but there is an essence of person behind those gestures and those words that are embodied by that person that I am connected with and that I care so deeply about. And all relationships are like that. The words that are spoken and the gestures that are experienced are just outward manifestations of something deeper that is really the object of my longing and the object of my relationship. And so the same thing is true with God. We may not hear human words coming from God's mouth. We may not always be woken up in the middle of the night with an inspirational thought or an impulse that we are compelled to follow. In moments of prayer, we are called to listen a little bit more deeply. And we're called to try to find something operative in our life that is not necessarily placed there by ourselves. We're asked to begin to listen to the fact that we are more complicated than we may often want to realize or believe, that the world may want to recognize and believe. That there is this eternal quality to us that goes far deeper than what I say and what I do, that speaks of the essence of who I am, but also the essence of the Creator who made me. And so when we listen to God, we want to begin to start to listen for some particular things. I'd like to lead into that a bit with a very popular scripture passage that we hear a lot at weddings and even funerals and other gatherings when people are together. And we often like it because of its poetic quality, but also because it does focus on love. And so it brings us into this place of relationship and a place where we feel this harmonious sense of bond with those who are around us during whatever time is being celebrated when we use it. But we often see it only in human terms. And we forget to see that it actually has more to do with God than it does with ourselves. And it comes from chapter 13 of the first letter of Corinthians. And I would like to just read verses 12 and 13 of that beautiful letter that we often use, that is familiar to us. And it says, if I speak with human tongues and angelic as well, but do not have love. We're all familiar with that passage. Well, the end of it goes on to say, verse 12, now we see indistinctly as in a mirror. Then I shall see face to face. So St. Paul is telling us we see dimly now. I mean, what we see is in life and we see in God is sometimes a reflection of the reality of things. And that when we enter into eternity, we're going to see more clearly. We're going to see face to face without any kind of veil or any kind of mystery in between me and what I'm perceiving. And he goes on to say, my knowledge is imperfect now. So there's going to be a development to what we know and what we see when we move from this life to the next. But we still have knowledge. It's imperfect, but we still have access to it. Then I shall know even as I am known. And here's the powerful line. There are in the end 3 things that last: faith, hope, and love. And he underscores the greatest of these is love. Faith, hope, and love. Now, if you listen to any of my homilies, you will hear a reference to faith, hope, and love quite often. And in many ways, I may sound like a broken record, but I can't emphasize enough how incredibly important these 3 virtues are for us coming to understand, know, and get a glimpse of the God who made us. You see, because we make the mistake of thinking that faith, hope, and love are something that are just part of the package of being a human being, that somehow it just comes with the goods. They don't. Faith, hope, and love are supernatural virtues. They're put into us, into the very soul of a human being, by God himself and God alone. Those virtues, faith, hope, and love, are direct links to God. And so in our habits of prayer, when we cultivate these times of silence, what we're really trying to do is peel back all of the stuff of our life, all of the concerns, all of the things that we obsess about, all of the anxieties, the fears, the preoccupations, our tendency to get involved in superficialities and the non-essentials of life, and to bring ourselves back to what really matters. And according to St. Paul, those 3 things are faith, hope, and love, because all the other stuff can go away. And in the end, those are the things that are going to remain. And they're going to remain because they're eternal. They're given to us by God. So when we're in those moments of silence, we need to try to listen for the faith underneath the anxiety and the fear. We have to begin to listen for the hope that brings light to those moments of darkness and despair that we can find ourselves creeping into. We can begin to look for the love, which really is what we desire to connect us with one another, with creation, with God. And so you see, all of these 3 things are underneath the stuff of our life. And so these moments of silence, these habits of prayer, are like peeling an orange. You want to take the skin of all of that stuff off and get to the reality of what really is of essence. And so if in our moments of prayer, even if they're just fleeting, if we can begin to tap into the resources of faith, hope, and love, then we're going to see in our active life, as we go back into the stuff of our life, we're going to find ourselves bringing this grounding with us, this deeper dimension. It's going to change up how we see things, how we deal with things, how we react to things, how we think about things. It's going to change up our relationships. We're going to find ourselves perhaps becoming more peace-filled and possessing another quality, which is so incredibly important in the spiritual life, and that's joy. You see, because in these interior moments of silence, when I can create that space within myself and externally around me, and cultivate those 3 essential virtues, faith, hope, and love, it's going to then bring me to a much deeper place. I'm going to drink more deeply of life. And I'm going to see myself connected not only to those that I care about, but to the poor, to those who are not as self-sufficient as I am, for those who are not as privileged as I am. I'm going to find myself connected to the world, to the environment, and caring about things more. It's not going to just be about me, but it's going to be about us and about what matters to God. And so I would like to conclude today with another statement from Mother Teresa, seeing as we started with her last week, that can give us something to think about and ponder as we go about the business of our lives and trying to unfold these habits of prayer, listening not for a human voice coming from God in those moments of quiet, but for the underlying essence of presence that can be found through those three virtues of faith, hope, and love. They exist in each person. We just have to discover them, find them, embrace them, name them, and give proper credit to the author of them, and that is only God. Now, Mother Teresa says to us, we need to understand the poor. There is not only material poverty, but also spiritual poverty. And a little IE here, spiritual poverty is so prevalent in our world. So many people are spiritually poor. And she goes on to say, this is harder and deeper, harboring even in the hearts of very wealthy men. So you can have the great house, you can have a tremendous bank account, but you can still be very spiritually poor. And I would go on to say, even incredibly unhappy. Perhaps because you've allowed all that stuff to distract you from what is inwardly really important and essential. She goes on to say, wealth is not only property and money, but our attachment to these things and our abuse of them. And that's where we run into problems as human beings. We not only attach ourselves too much to stuff, but then we go the next step and abuse it. When things become our masters, we are very poor. And so long as there are rich people who commit excess and do not use things according to the mind of God, there will be poverty in the world. So you see, alleviating poverty isn't just about finding a way to feed people material food. Resolving the problems of poverty and truly living out the virtues of faith, hope, and love is really about figuring out the mind of God and then living and acting accordingly, avoiding excess and abuse. Now that's a much taller order. You see, it's a lot easier to go to our cupboards and find a few canned goods and some pasta and some things to put in a bag and to feed the poor. It's a much different thing to change our lives. But understanding the mind of God is not something that's just an intellectual pursuit. It's something that can only come from developing a deep habit of prayer, cultivating inner and exterior silence, following the virtues of faith, hope, and love, embracing them, learning from them, ultimately learning from God and discovering his presence as the author of those things, and then bringing those out into the world through peaceful lives, through lives of justice, but most importantly, lives that are joy-filled. I truly hope that this week brings you a sense of peace and joy, that you're able to cultivate that interior world of silence by creating it around you first, and then discovering the precious gifts that only God can provide during that sacred and holy time. May God bless you. May God be with you. See you next week.